Alrighty. It is time for GP Estrathe. Pairings have already been posted. I did a nice little deck list stream last night on Twitch. But I figure before we dive into rounds of gameplay, which will go up sporadically over the month as my matches come and go. But before we dive into any of that, I think it is really important to talk about the deck that I chose to bring, why I chose to bring it, and some of the choices that I made going through the deck. So if you have watched my previous league run with Grixis Gargantua, um, at this point I think I'm comfortable spoiling a little bit of what happened, namely that was a 4-1 league run, only dropping a match to Caillou on 5-color Golden Age. I had a lot of things I really liked about that deck, but the biggest issue that I had was that the mana base felt really inconsistent. So in an effort to curb that, I have dropped the third color. I am no longer on red. Garen was the only primary reason I was playing red to begin with. So now I have just gone full in on blue and black. This is a shell a lot closer to what Stasis has been playing. Stasis, the set designer for Cliques of Nylon, has been playing a blue-black graveyard tempo deck, trying to top off at Scrapyard Mecha and Chittering Gargantua. So I decided to adopt a shell much more similar to theirs, taking the 4 open sort of tech slots that they had for 2 Spellbane Sentinel, and I am drawing a blank at the moment on the other 2 but those 2 cards that they cut, those were, Arduous Miners, 2 Arduous Miners, but they felt that those cards were kind of underperforming in the deck. And while I was very satisfied with Arduous Miners in the Grixis shell, there's not as much care for just rushing anything and everything into the graveyard, and not as many ways of eating the graveyard. So I'm not as crazy about Miners here. And also, I think Miners just pairs up really unfortunately into a bulk of what's going on in the format at the moment. I don't really want to be discarding my opponent's cards blindly. I don't want to give my opponent discard outlets if I'm up against the mirror or up against like red black extraction decks or extraction mission decks. So I have opened those 4 slots up, and Stasis and I have both kind of gone in on Lurking Virkalakis as the final piece of the puzzle. I was very happy with this card in a lot of the league matches that I played with it. It sort of single-handedly won a handful of those league matches. It just is such a huge piece to have for the puzzle. And the version that Stasis was playing with did something that I was not really doing, which was leaning on cards like Feast of Whispered Knives and Glana to help push over the edge, um, as well as some interaction between Omen of Deception and Agent of Deception. So the theory here is, rather than just kind of rush everything to the graveyard as fast as possible, burn the opponent out as fast as possible, just jam as many things as quickly as possible, and just cross your fingers. This deck is a little more looking to try and get some sort of engine going, whether that is um, Feast of Whispered Knives, Glauna, whether that is Scrapyard Mecha, whether that's just like getting an early Chittering Gargantua in play and hoping the opponent can't interact with it. But rather than doing what my league run did, which was kind of just hope that I could play through anything that gets interacted with, I am actually coming with a plan for stopping interaction, which is the Omen of Deceptions, which is the Agent of Deceptions. Agent can stop a Planeswalker or creature that might be threatening the engine, can stop key creature or planeswalker that might be able to tear the deck apart, can slow the opponent down pretty meaningfully. Omen of Deception is going to be able to just stop board wipes, stop interaction. I can let my opponent go for a Get Your Wish, let the Get Your Wish resolve, and then sort of blow out the board wipe, or I could just sort of blow out the Get Your Wish right then and there to avoid the board wipe from even coming out of the deck. Um, there's a lot of tricky play that's going to come into question with Omen of Deception, with Agent of Deception. There's one of each of them in the sideboard as well, so it's going to be sort of a puzzle of figuring out which is more important in which matchups. Going into my first round matchup, which I do know about, I do think it is going to be likely I will want the 4th Agent of Deception. And whether or not I want the 4th Omen is going to kind of be yet to be seen. Otherwise, like the big difference from my league deck list is because we're deep on trying to have Feast of Whispered Knives be a consistent and stable engine. Ignited Soul is joined by Deep Treader Arcanist to provide us 8 different 1-drops that can have Feast active on turn 2. This is going to help us have a more meaningful uh, opening hand where we can have Feast of Whisper Knives. This is going to provide us more stable ways of just kind of pitching away our things. Having 12 1-drops is somewhere I really like being, because 2 1-drops in play is enough to get a Chittering Gargantua in play, since any creature that you sacrifice and then exile from your graveyard in the process of casting Gargantua pays for 4. So if we can get like a Rivaling, Deep Treader Arcanist, Ignited Soul, any combination of that in play early. Agent of Deception is also kind of a throwaway body, so like any of that we can put in play early, Chittering Gargantua can then feed on to dig us a bit deeper, which is nice. Or to not dig us deeper, but just to apply more pressure. Um, Beyond that, like this is kind of the plan. The only other big thing is Stasis and I have different paths that we have taken. Stasis was on 4 redeveloped cityscape previously, as well as 7 islands and 6 swamps. Stasis and I have both gone down a redeveloped cityscape, but we have done different things to our mana base. Stasis has stayed on the 7th island and turned that redeveloped cityscape into the 7th swamp. I have taken that 7th island and turned it into the 7th swamp, but I'm staying at 6 islands, and the redeveloped cityscape has instead turned into another tap land. I do still have 4 lands that sort of put something into play tapped on turn 1, but I have opted for that 4th land to be Ephemeral Mire rather than going just to the 3 cityscapes for tapped lands. I like the Ephemeral Mire as just being a means of pushing over a bit of extra damage in the mid to late game. Mecha can meaningfully contribute to Devotion, as can Feast of Whispered Knives. Glauna contributes to Devotion. Ignited Soul, Deep Treader Arcanist both contribute Devotion. So I like Ephemeral Mire as a one of. I'm excited to see how often this actually comes up. Having the extra tap land may hurt us more than it helps us, but only time will tell. Moving on to the sideboard. This particular shell, like maybe not necessarily the Ephemeral Mire, I don't recall, but this particular shell in some form was something I mentioned in my GP prep video as something that I was very much looking at playing. But the one difference between the deck list I provided in the video versus the one that I'm playing here is the difference between Fido's Offshoot and Soul Guide Lantern. So just switching over to the deck editor real quick, and we can get card image much more visible. Fido's Offshoot, my theory behind Fido's Offshoot originally was this is a manaless way to exile our opponent's graveyard if we can get this into our bin, because we have plenty of ways of interacting with our own graveyard, and then this can yield us some value against other graveyard decks, which I like. The top 3 decks that I had on my radar are all graveyard decks, so that was all like stuff that I was wary of. Stasis has stayed on the 2 of Fido's Offshoot, in part thinking that this is a solid way to also hand attack opponents, gives them some graveyard hate that also has additional game against Golden Age, which is nice. I have gone off the Fido's Offshoot in favor of the Soul Guide Lanterns. My rationale here for Soul Guide Lantern being the better bet here is threefold. For starters, it is an instant speed way of hating on the opponent's graveyard that does not require like any other pieces to make it instant speed. Because ultimately, as the deck currently stands, Lurking Dirkalakis can only exile things at sorcery speed, Writhling can only do it at sorcery speed, Gargantua, Mecha all only exile things from our graveyard at sorcery speed. So ultimately, Fido's Offshoot in the graveyard can only really be exiled at sorcery speed, meaning we can't really get our opponent who may be going for a on the stack extraction mission, which is difficult. You know, I really want to be able to shut down extraction mission when I can. I think that is a deck that is very worthy to be reckoned with. So having a means of combating that at instant speed seems very worthwhile. On top of that, There are two other reasons why I do like the Soul Guide Lantern. For starters, it can on enter exile target card from a graveyard, lets us pick away some singular thing important to our opponent, but more importantly, gives us some extra pieces in the sideboard to hit a Zigzag's Apex in our graveyard, a Rivaling in our graveyard, just to sort of yield that extra value. And finally, in a pinch where we just do not need the graveyard hate, but perhaps we want to take stuff out of the deck, or we're against a graveyard matchup, but the graveyard hate's not the most important thing we have right now, we can sacrifice this to draw a card and get a loyalty counter on Glauna, or get a feast trigger at end of turn if we have no other ways of indulging. Otherwise, again, we have the one of Agent and Omen in the sideboard to sort of round out the play sets. I imagine oftentimes that is going to be sort of shifting between dropping an Omen for an Agent or vice versa, but perhaps I could see a world where, like, we just want to get off the mechas and we, like, bring in the additional counter magic. Otherwise, we have Conspiracy of Wealth as more graveyard hate. This is another thing very similar to Soul Guide Lantern that can pick apart individual cards from the opponent's graveyard, but I also like it because it can hit your own yard as well. And we are built to indulge pretty consistently. This is another way of queuing up our indulge triggers as well. I do see this being something we could reasonably bring in over the mecha if and when it matters. We have 3 of Beauclair's Scorn to counter non-creature spells and strip them from the opponent's decks. There are some non-creature spells I'm very particularly wary of. I would love to hit a Chronicle of Extinction or an Iris Pledge with this. I know Split Moon is on a playset of each in the main deck, so that is going to be something I have to be very wary of, and something that I'm going to want the Beauclair's Scorn for. On 2 of Maim, I do want some way of interacting with the board beyond just Glauna. Glauna does serviceably interact with the board and push some damage in the process, but I do want some more interaction beyond that, and Maim is kind of the best option we have in our colors. This is really the big place where dropping the red splash hurts, because I would much rather have Braze over Maim, but I'd also much rather have a stable mana base, so Maim will have to cut it. Unfortunately, we do not have any legendary creatures in our deck for Maim to be active, though, so it will only ever be hitting small creatures and planeswalkers. And then finally, 3 of Invasion of Privacy. I had been trying Search and Seizure in the sideboard of my league run, but Stasis had been opting for Invasion of Privacy, and I ultimately think Invasion is the better pick, both because it is more castable. If we can't find a blue source for Search and Seizure, that kind of becomes a problem. And also the Exile, I had underestimated how important having Exile hand attack was for the format right now. But the fact of the matter is, just with all of the graveyard decks running around, hitting stuff and exiling it rather than just putting it in the graveyard seems very important. And also, drawing a card and pinging our opponent off the Invasion of Privacy is good, even if us taking one and our opponent drawing a card is less good. So all in all, that is my deck list for the GP. I'm very excited to see how this goes. There will be 4 rounds of Swiss play, best of 3. If we go 3-1 or 4-0, we will be getting into the top cut. So, yet to be determined how many matches we'll truly get out of this deck. If we go 0-2 in the first 2 rounds, I will push through and record the future 2 rounds just for the sake of kind of trying to get in some cool games of Magic. But I'm definitely aiming for that top cut, so let's see how it all goes. I will see you in round 1.